to a seat and we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Caitlin Hoff-Mahoney, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Matheson History Museum. We also have joining us today Sal Kumela, who is the new Executive Director of the Matheson History Museum. So he will be fully taking over when I depart at the end of this month. But we are really excited to be back for our fall programs. Thank you all for braving the weather tonight. It just came up out of nowhere in the last 15 minutes, so thank you for coming out. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors. We are sponsored in part by Visit Gainesville, Alachua County, the City of Gainesville, and Florida Humanities, which is a special sponsor for all of our programming surrounded our Voices and Votes Democracy exhibit. So we just recently finished up with the Smithsonian version of the exhibit that was here right where you're sitting. And we still have on the walls until sometime next year the Alachua County and Florida component of that exhibit. So I encourage you to take some time and explore that. So again, thank you for coming out. And now I will introduce our speaker tonight. James Abraham is a former journalist who now edits and publishes books. His book broker Publishers, which he founded in 2004, has produced or edited more than 500 books in a variety of genres. Abraham is a popular writing coach, critic, and lecturer. A graduate of Oberlin College and a Florida Humanities Scholar, Abraham is the author of Century, People's History of Charlotte County. So thank you all very much, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Abraham.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Willett. Good meeting you. And thank you all for braving the rain. Although if you're from Florida, you're used to this, right? Okay, and I particularly want to thank the two ladies sitting right there with the vote t-shirts on. That's very important, and I've been trying to time my lectures to speak to this election, which is crucial. Let me begin my talk, which again describes why these times they've happened before, but right now it's particularly dangerous. There we go. 100 years separate Florida Governor Sidney Johnson Katz, a jackleg, defrocked Baptist minister who remade himself in Florida as a reformed governor and prohibitionist, from Ron DeSantis, a Yale-educated lawyer who rose from being an insignificant congressman to governor and presidential contender by embracing the tactics and policies of former disgraced President Donald Trump. What do they have in common? They illustrate 100 years of voter intimidation based on a sense of entitlement, a belief that only certain people should vote while the rest of us do not deserve a say in our own affairs. Katz was inaugurated as governor on January 2nd, 1917. His inaugural speech set the tone for the times when he said, "Your triumph is no less in this good hour in beautiful Florida, for you have withstood the onslaught of the county and state political rings, the corporations, railroads, the fierce opposition of the press, the organization of the Negro voters of the state against you, and the power of the Roman Catholic hierarchy against you. Yet over all of these, the common people of Florida, the everyday cracker people, have triumphed." Now you see right then and there, he's defining the others and the us. And the us are good white people who voted for them. The others are everybody else. Sound familiar? 100 years ago, this politician was doing the same thing that Trump and his copycats have turned into an art form, labeling those who oppose him as dangerous and accusing them of stirring religious and racial hatreds. Now, the nation at that time was going through a serious era of xenophobism. It was retrenchment after World War I. Fear of a red takeover reverberated. After Russia's royal family was replaced by communists, the Austro-Hungarian Empire failed, and the Turkish Empire also failed. Cats like Trump played on such fears to demonize anyone other than a teetotaling white man. His administration ushered in what one writer called the age of barbarism. Women considered loose were taken out in the woods and beaten. Black people were killed indiscriminately. And the whole notion was that the country was under siege from colored forces, be it red, be it black, be it Asian, and that white men had to be the bastion to defend so called democracy. How many people here saw the movie Albert Cantry? Remember the scene when he took Dan out in the woods and whipped him half to death? That was based on real life. I mean, that really happened back then when people felt they had the license to define culture through violence. We're back there again now. And I think we need to be conscious that this is nothing new. It's always been a hidden cancer in our society, and it's back now. In 1919, Katz publicly labeled Black residents as part of an inferior race and refused to criticize two lynchings that took place. He was quoted in the press as saying that only the vagrant, vagabond, worthless Negro is lynched. When the NAACP complained about the lynchings, Katz wrote denouncing the organization and blacks generally, saying that your race is always harping on the disgrace it brings to the state by a concourse of white people taking revenge for the dishonoring of a white woman. When if you would teach your people not to kill our white officers or disgrace our white women, you would keep down 1,000 times greater disgrace. Now, again, if you listen to J.P. Vance over the past few days, he wound up blaming the press and the immigrants for his own lies. Again, it's an old textbook method, and here 100 years ago, guys were doing it. And I could take you back to the times of Maximilian or Hammurabi, and you find them doing the same thing. Enter July Perry, a respected member of the black community who urged other blacks to vote. In 1920, after visiting the local courthouse and demanding to be allowed to register to vote, July and a few others were hounded. Perry was arrested after an incident at his home where white people showed up asking, what is he doing trying to vote? He was arrested, taken to jail. The sheriff basically opened the jail, let the mob in, and they lynched him. That led to the Ocoee riots. People are familiar with Rosewood, but Ocoee was part of that same mood in the 1920s, where the best way to teach newly enfranchised blacks to stay home was to terrorize them, to scare them, to kill them. Rosewood, which was burnt to the ground by a white mob, was a graphic reflection of which way the political winds blew during the 1920s. Whites completed a movement that had started right after the Civil War, where they regained control of the state and destroyed any efforts to broaden the circle of power. Black voter registration was discouraged, and soon the state had returned to its pre-Civil War balance of power, with decision-making in politics restricted to the northern tier of counties. Politics stagnated into races between white men only, and no Republicans allowed. A lot of people find it hard to believe that the two parties basically have changed their racial stance. Prior to the Civil War, the Democrats were the party of racism, and any Northerners who went along with Democrats were buying into slavery. Of course, in 1846, the Republican Party fielded its first political candidate. The Republican Party was an amalgamation of what they call free soilers, people who believe that the new states should be free, black people like Frederick Douglass who believe there should be no slavery, and just right thinking white people that knew this country, the way it was conceived, could not condone slavery. In 1846, they ran John C. Fremont, who got beat really badly. But 4 years later, of course, they were successful with Abraham Lincoln. And that, of course, led to the Civil War. But I'm digressing. Let me get back to this. Voter registration during the 1920s was discouraged, and soon the state returned to a pre Civil War balance of power. Next slide. According to Myrna Perez of the Brennan Institute, this was part of a pattern that emerged during Reconstruction. In response to emancipation, Florida's legislature, like many of its southern neighbors, enacted black codes, a series of laws designed to restrict the activities of freed blacks and ensure their continued availability as a labor force. The photo on the left illustrates the Plessy versus Ferguson decision. That was when the Supreme Court decided that it was possible and culturally viable to have separate but equal institutions. Of course, the institutions were separate, but by nature of separation, it meant one party was inferior and the actual resources were equally inferior. Now, what also happened was a series of criminal codes designed to practically restore slavery. The legislature passed an act to prescribe additional penalties for the commission of offenses against the state and for other purposes. The other purposes enumerated a lengthy list of crimes, such as assault of a white female, burglary, housebreaking, possession of weapons, and many others, for which severe penalties like public whipping were imposed. The code criminalized disobedience, impudence, and even disrespect to the employer. Now, some of you have heard the expression driving while black, living while black, going to McDonald's while black. Now, this was legalized by the state of Florida. Now, the photograph on the left shows a turpentine camp, which was a living hell. Anybody familiar with turpentine camps? Yeah. During World War One, when the Germans were seeking a lot of merchant shipping, the Allies turned to wooden ships because they just needed more ships really fast, and it was quicker to build a wooden ship than a metal one. Suddenly, there was a demand for what they call naval stores, like turpentine or whatever. So, what people, particularly in Florida, Louisiana, southern states, would do was come up with excuses to arrest black men who just happened to be walking down the street and put them to work in here. Now, these turpentine camps had fences, and they weren't designed to keep people out. In Charlotte County, where I'm from, there's a graveyard dedicated to black workers who were beat to death in the turpentine camp located in my county. Constant intimidation and harassment kept black voter registration low. According to the Brennan Center, Gadsden County, which is the only majority black district county rather in Florida, had 12,261 voting age black residents in 1961, but only 7 were registered to vote. That would change during the civil rights movement, as we'll see. But I'd like to pause here and say the examples I gave laid the basis for the gist of my talk, what this means for us today. History is well and good, but too many people tend to stick it in a box and leave it alone. History determines what we're going to be because it shows what we can be at our worst or at our best. And so you ignore it to your peril. The politics of white supremacy are woven into the DNA of Florida and our country. And despite 100 years of separation between Sidney Johnson Katz and Ron DeSantis, racism means we're still playing the same old games. This was a common headline during the 1920s. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of opposition. Basically, this was the era of white supremacy. Again, it was a reaction to this World War One, a reaction to a brief economic downturn after the war, and it played into the natural sentiments of white men who felt they were losing power. So let's switch to the present to show how things have not really changed. So let's look at all the lines today. Consider that the most recent congressional redistricting map is rated F by nonpartisan observers. It completely guts a district in North Florida that was set up specifically for Black voters. That district went from the Black communities of Jacksonville all the way across North Florida to Gadsden County, which, as I mentioned, was the only majority Black county in Florida. Ron DeSantis, in an unprecedented move for a governor, rewrote or redrew the state lines to destroy the Black district. Al Lawson, a former Florida A&M University basketball star who later became a congressman, watched his seat get destroyed. He didn't even have to run for office. He was redistricted out of his own territory. Now, Al Lawson's case is still in litigation. I'm not sure how it'll be resolved, but it's too late to make any difference in the congressional elections coming up this year. Now, what's interesting about this is the language that Ron DeSantis uses. It's the same language you hear from a lot of racists. For example, they'll bring up Martin Luther King and say, we don't believe in affirmative action or DEI because we judge people on a content of their character. Come on. I like to be judged on a content of my character, but I'd love an opportunity to pick my judges. Ron DeSantis' map was labeled F by nonpartisan observers. That's how bad it was. It was designed solely to perpetuate Republican power at the expense of the power of Black people. What DeSantis did was use a popular tactic called cracking. What that means is you'll break up a district, a predominantly Black district, for example, by splitting it. This goes against every rule of redistricting. One of the first rules of redistricting is contiguity. What that means is the land has to be together. Before Ron DeSantis came into power, if you look at the blue area, that was a Democratic district right there. That's the district where the first Black superintendent of schools came to power. It was a major source of Black political power. It revolves around St. Petersburg, Tampa, Ybor City. After DeSantis got into power, look at the map on the right. Suddenly, the district was split by Tampa Bay. Now, stop a moment and think logically what that means in terms of canvassing, what it means in terms of the coffee get togethers, what this means in terms of political rallies. This is called cracking when you split a district and put its people in different districts where they have less power. A little bit of humor here. I had to put that in there. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of the laws against giving water to voters standing in line. Years ago, although I don't go to church, I was active in the Soul to Polls movement, where every Sunday we'd show up with vans and pick up voters and take them down to vote. But you know what happened to that, right? That's long gone. Now, how many people registered or voted by mail during the last election? I'm sure you all know what the legislature did to take care of that, right? You have to re register to vote. And if you don't, your vote won't count this time around. And the legislature will say it's your fault for not reading the newspapers. 100 years ago, they dragged people out in the street and beat them to death because they wanted to vote. Now the state, in the form of DeSantis, employs state power to do the same thing. About 3 years ago, if you remember, Ron DeSantis' election enforcement police, which do we need that really? They went out and arrested a gang of men and one woman who they claimed had violated voting laws. Now, all of these people were former felons who had their rights restored thanks to a constitutional amendment that a lot of people, some people in this room might have helped with that. But what happened afterwards? The legislature decided that, okay, you could vote, but first you had to pay every single fine you had. We helped set up funds to help guys pay these fines off. But the damage was done. I mean, imagine if you're a returning citizen, you just got a job, getting your life together. The police show up in the morning, your neighbors looking out the window watching you get hauled off to jail. Talk about a disincentive to vote. And it gets worse than that. I belong to the NAACP, and this year the NAACP declined to do voter registration because the state passed punitive laws that would send people to jail or fine them severely if there's any discrepancy in the voter registration forms. Now, when I say discrepancy, I don't mean lies or getting things wrong. I mean making mistakes that the state will come down hard on you on if you do that. Did I? There it is. Now, you have to remember that some 12,000 voters were purged from Florida's voting rolls in 2000 after being wrongly identified as convicted felons. 41% of them were black voters. In 2011, Governor Rick Scott rolled back changes made by his predecessor that had made it easier for convicted felons to regain the vote. In the spirit of 19th century black codes, Scott and the cabinet made it even harder than before to vote by imposing a 5 to 7 year waiting period before a convicted felon could apply to have their rights restored. Also in 2011, Scott signed an expansive bill that cut the number of early voting days in half. And as I mentioned, eliminated early voting on Sunday. No more souls to the polls, the Sunday before Election Day. Now, traditionally, I hate to give you all the stereotype, but black people are always or often late. And so that last Sunday before Election Day used to be the day when we show up in our vans and load them up with church people. They took away that last Sunday before Election Day. After conducting what state leaders boasted was the best election ever in 2020, Republican leaders started making changes to make sure that only Republicans would be elected. Changes included making it harder to get a mail in ballot, banning drop off boxes for ballots, and allowing only a direct family member to drop off a voter's ballot for them. Now, these latest proposed changes have no basis in election fraud, but rather represent the lies and crooked lines of modern white supremacists. Recently, Ron DeSantis announced again a major crackdown on what he called election criminals. But I mentioned these guys. None of these guys were convicted of anything. They were just embarrassed to hell. Some of them lost their jobs. But do you think that they would be eager about getting out and voting again or urging other people to vote? I mentioned bloody streets 100 years ago. Now it's crooked lines, but it's doing the same thing. It's restricting the vote. I did a little bit of research on the reaction of some of these people to being arrested, and it ranges from Ramona Oliver, 55 years old. When the cops showed up to arrest her, she just sobbed, "Oh my God!" Voter fraud. I voted, but I ain't commit no fraud. And in her mind, she didn't. In another video, Nathan Hart, he was convicted of a felony molestation charge in 2006, but he served his time. He signed up to vote again. It said someone at the driver's license office said, just fill out these forms. And if they let you vote, then you can. If they don't, then you can't. He tried to vote, and you saw what happened to him. I thought felons were able to vote, said Tony Patterson, while he was being led away in handcuffs. The deed was done. Again, if you're a returning citizen, the arrest would have a chilling effect on your deciding whether to vote. I know when I go out canvassing and I talk to people who have served their time, they're reluctant to even come near voting because they don't want to wind up like these people. Again, although they weren't convicted, some of them lost their jobs. You could imagine the humiliation, a disruption of life solely to protect a way of life. Bloody streets. I knew it early on that white supremacist violence was part and parcel of the intimidation tactics used for voter repression. But as the last election proved, such violence is not a thing of the past. According to election experts Major Garrett and David Becker, political violence could materialize during the upcoming midterms. In fact, violence is their worst fear at the moment. I'm not worried at all about the processing and counting of ballots, Becker said recently. The problem I'm really concerned about is that losing candidates might follow the playbook of former President Trump and seek to delegitimize elections when they've lost. And that could leave an opening for political violence. If you think I'm joking, consider what's going on right now, where you have the vice presidential candidate of a major party maligning a whole community of immigrants. Have you all kept tabs of what's going on in Springfield? Right now, colleges have shut down, public events have canceled, all because of a lie that Vance admitted to. He said he lied. And that's where we are. Bloody streets to crooked lines. Now, after the great flood, the Bible says that God put a rainbow in the sky as a covenant, the promise that if you all act right, I'll never do this again. But as James Baldwin noted, God also told folks that if they didn't act right, it would be the fire next time. Now, after 100 years, we're right back to where we started, making the same mistakes and facing an election that, after years of bloody streets and crooked lines, we anticipate almost with dread, both here in Florida and beyond. Thank you. I'm actually a lot better answering questions than giving talks. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Make me look good.
Okay, so we have a second microphone. So if you have a question, I would ask that you would come and speak it into the microphone. We have people watching on Zoom, and they want to hear the question too. And if you are one of our people watching on Zoom and you have a question, please put it into the chat and I will share that for you. Anyone brave enough to go first?
I do like they do down in Charlotte County. Stand up and make a statement, say I have a question and talk some stuff. Got one. Okay.
I'd like to know why Trump and J.D. Vance are not being charged with inciting violence.
So would I. And I'm sorry, but so would I. I look at, and let me go on for that. Lawrence O'Donnell last night made a good point. Those Supreme Court judges that got rid of Roe versus Wade, that led to those poor women dying, they got blood on their hands. and they should be charged. Every act of political violence in Springfield should be laid at the feet of Vance. Lincoln made a good point. During the Civil War, they were about to shoot a deserter who had listened to Clement Vallandigham. He was an Ohio politician who was an ardent secessionist, anti-unionist guy who stayed in the North when the South seceded from Ohio. He would make speeches about how illegitimate the war was and we need to get out of it. Poor boy from Ohio listened to that and deserted. And they were about to shoot him. And Lincoln made a good point of why should we shoot this boy and not touch a hair on the head of the wily agitator. And I believe that today, these people should be held accountable. And the best way to hold them accountable is to vote them out. Vote them out. Let them know that this society, this country has no room for that. And we have to do it at the ballot box because apparently our justice system, which has been corrupted by these people, is not working. That's a long answer to your question, but
We have a question from someone on Zoom. How can we help now to get people to vote? And what actions would help change?
basically just get out there. Just wear your t-shirts like the woman in the front row. Right now, what we're doing down in Charlotte County is calling all the Democrats to remind them that you've got to renew your registration if you vote by mail, to try to get them to turn out and let them know that there are Democrats who are right thinking people in their community. So the most important thing is to get out with your friends and neighbors, join a Democratic club, start registering people, but become a part of this. Trotsky made a point of saying you may not be interested in the war, but the war is sure interested in you. It's the same way with politics. So you can't stay home on this one because there's some people very interested in you. There's a guy over there.
Thank you for your presentation. We
That-
had the word deconstruction down here, but I remember hearing the word redemption versus reconstruction versus redemption. In case people don't know about it here, could you talk about that 1876 election and Rutherford B. Hayes?
That's a very good point. Basically, depending on who's talking, Reconstruction was a period lasting from the end of the Civil War, 1865, to 1876, during a presidential election. During the presidential election, as I mentioned, Democrats basically ruled in the South. They were the party of racists. Samuel J. Tilden, a reform mayor, from New York, ran for president. He was tied with Rutherford B. Hayes, a middle of the road Republican politician from Ohio. Florida and Louisiana submitted two sets of election returns, declaring each of the men the winner, similar to what you heard after our recent election. The Democrats in Florida made a deal with the Republican, Rutherford B. Hayes, that they would legitimize the slate of electors that voted for Hayes in exchange for Hayes ending Reconstruction in Florida. And he did that. That is why you could put an actual date on the end of Reconstruction. Not Union, I'm sorry. United States troops were withdrawn from the South. Basically, the South went back into the hands of the former slave owners who called themselves, as you mentioned, sir, redeemers. And they referred to that period as the period of redemption. Does that speak to your question? Okay.
Yeah, can you explain the psychology of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, where he has been a complete enabler to actually what I consider a white supremacist agenda covertly, but anyway, so I don't know if you've got any reflections on Supreme Court Justice Thomas.
Well, some phrases and expressions have more weight depending on who they come from. So when I call Clarence Thomas and Uncle Tom, it should carry a lot of weight. Clarence Thomas is one of those people who, once they get to the castle, they pull up the drawbridge. They sort of forget how they got there. And they get fat and happy, drinking good wine and flying around the country. I think they deserve that. They fail to speak to our ancestors who helped get him there. I can't explain to Clarence Thomas except to say he's an Uncle Tom who has no sense of history. Any other questions?
First of all, as I'm Robert Mounts, President of the Matheson Board, and I want to thank you sincerely for your presentation. But second, 6 years ago, when Ron DeSantis ran the first time, he only won by about 30,000 votes against a very strong black candidate, Andrew Gillum, who unfortunately, unlike his counterpart in Georgia, kind of did a downward spiral after that. But the black vote in Dade County, Miami-Dade County particularly, has gone away. Liberty City has been transformed completely. And I just wonder today, what do you think, how effective do you think Kamala Harris or any black candidate or blended candidate will be in getting out the black vote in Florida?
That's a good question. I think too many times people who mean well, they deliver the message without any joy or verb to the point where you got to work. You got to go to the polls to make this happen. But after Joe Biden, to his credit, to his dignity, to his grace as a man and a statesman, chose to give up power, which hasn't been done since Lyndon Johnson did it, if you remember. After he did that, we have a candidate who speaks to politics of joy, the politics of inclusion, the politics of fun, the politics of can do. I think the Black community needs a message like that. I think Kamala Harris's candidacy has sparked Black voter interest and the interest of young people who for too long have felt frozen out even by an aging, graying generation of Black leaders. So I'm very optimistic. The Democrats have a very deep bench. They got that guy, Maxwell Frost. He's in his 20s. He just got elected. I think as far as getting out the Black vote, we need to excite Black people, not scare them. I mean, I think Kamala Harris's message is exciting the Black vote. I think that'll make a difference. Okay, can I go home now? Yes, ma'am.
What would you say to the people who at this point say, okay, I'm going to go vote, but all we're going to hear is that the vote is a fraud, it's complicit. How is it that our vote is really going to be legitimate at this point?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One word, landslide. We've got to show up in such numbers and such power that there's no question, as opposed to who won. Show up in such numbers with such power that anyone who questions it will look like the fool and the knave that they are. So to me, the solution is just a high voter turnout. If you get that small margin, yeah, that's wiggle room where people could talk stuff. But let's make this real by destroying these people who have been destroying our country. Yes.
I want to go back to an earlier thing with responsibility. We were talking about the Supreme Court, how they have blood on their hands, but it goes above that. they're architects of this whole thing that nobody talks about, or not a lot. You know, the billionaires up there kind of trying to run the world that we don't hear as much about, but we have to battle that because they're the ones who are putting these Supreme Court justices in there and,
Yes,
you know, indirectly, but they're basically, yeah.
yes. Now,
So,
you talk about guys like Leonard Leo,
yes, exactly.
yeah, or the Heritage Foundation, or the Koch
Exactly.
brothers.
Project 2025, we're hearing a lot about that, but it's the
Mhm.
people behind it that that we should all be focused on because
Well,
they're trying to really run the world there.
I'll tell you something, and this is why I have hope. The United States is one of the few, and certainly the first, planned country. People sat down and said, we're going to create a country. And they grew up a blueprint for that country. And what that country included at the time was the fact that only propertied white men could vote. But one of those propertied white men made a very good point. James Madison spoke of the broadening of the sphere. As people are ready and willing to assume civic responsibility, they deserve a right to be a part of that country and to vote. That's been our history ever since. Now, right now, you have a small minority of people who want to hold on to what they have. The power of the vote can be measured by the amount of measures taken against it. What that means is one millionaire, despite his money, is not the equal of 100 people who show up and vote. When people whine about the Koch brothers or Leo or, oh, we can't do anything, they're playing right into the hands of people like that who will flash dollar bills at you and tell you to stay home because this is the power. If you think I'm joking, just go back to 1932 when the forces of power and Herbert Hoover wanted to hold on to power, even though they had wrecked this country. And suddenly you saw people who never voted before get out there to elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And you saw the change, right? We got Social Security. We got the Wagner Act, which ensured the growth of labor unions. We got people politics as a result of that. And that happened at the polls. And for people who whine and say, oh, they're too powerful, imagine how powerful the oligarchy was in the 1930s. And imagine the tools we have today. If these kids on TikTok started saying vote instead of play this music, if all those went home and put memes up, first meme I saw, the only black job is voting. There's more of us than there are of them. And I started this lecture by talking about the way this country was organized because it was organized on that principle. That's what we need to get back to. We need to stop whining about the people with money. I don't have any money. And so I'm out there working as hard as I can to get people to vote. So, yeah, the Leonard Leos, the Koch brothers, they're all out there. They're fighting a retrenchment effort because they see the way history is moving toward people. And the last thing we need right now is the people to give up. I think they lost the fight. I hope that answered your question. I was all over the map.
Presentation because it was so much more eloquent than I am, because I get really upset. I get mad.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the people. What I was saying, came in late. I was at another event at the library, and I had to come here, so I knew it was going to be a presentation about history of Black voter suppression and the Black vote. But I was saying I wish I could just have you come along with me because you're a lot calmer and more eloquent. Because I get really upset. I mean, I really get furious when I run into people, especially young people, who
Yes.
say that their vote doesn't matter. And I'm like, look, and what you said earlier, it's really a matter of critical thinking. If your vote didn't matter, why would they spend so much time and effort trying to suppress your vote or doing everything they can in their power to keep you from voting
There you
or to
go.
dissuade you from going to vote? So, and what you were saying, when I hear about the oligarchies and stuff, the oligarchs, there's so much, there's so many of us, and our vote has so much power, and there's only a fraction of us that come out to vote. You know, whenever I get these um, things in my email about come out to vote, I'm like, why are you spending your time on me?
Mm-hmm.
If you have data, you know I've been voting since I was 18 years old in every election.
Yeah.
Stop wasting your time on me. I'm gonna go vote. Try to get these new people, these young people, these first time voters. Spend your time and effort on trying to get them to come out.
Yes.
So
I couldn't
that's
agree
my
with you more. I don't know if you all remember, but years ago, um, we took civics in school, and we really did learn how our government works. I remember as a boy, we actually took a tour of City Hall, that sort of stuff. I could sing Baltimore, my Baltimore. You know, I know stuff from then. I think, and this is me being a conspiracy theorist or a fool, but I think one reason why they discourage civic education right now is I think they want a population of people who don't know enough to vote. And unfortunately, with all of these devices and phones and stuff, that's what we're moving toward. What if, I'll say this again, what if we harness those devices to get out the vote as opposed to K-pop music or whatever? Yeah, yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
It's on. I just had two thoughts while you were during the presentation, and one is I think that there's a lot of disillusion and sadness and depression because people feel powerless in the current situation, but there's no reason to feel powerless because we have the vote, and if we can communicate the power of that power, the power of the possibilities that can happen with using that tool that we have already, that people have fought for over the years, that change can come, and that people don't have to be depressed. We can work together toward improving the situations for those that need to be their situations improved, to have more equality. And another thought that I wanted to share is I think often we think about freedom. We're free in this country, we're free, but in some other places where I've been, they talk about the responsibilities that go along with your privileges. And so our responsibility is to vote in order to have that freedom that people envisioned and that have struggled for over so many years. And so in whatever way that we can communicate this to those who feel despondent, so that they can have a spark, a feeling that things don't have to keep going in the direction that they've been going in, that we have a few powerful people that are controlling so much suffering, that doesn't have to be that way.
That's right. That's right. Thank you.
So I would just like to briefly invite, we have several representatives here today from the League of Women Voters of Alachua County. So if I could get one of you, I'm going to put you on the spot, to just come briefly talk about the voter resources that you all make available.
I forgot my vote shirt. Should I talk this way or zoom this way? Okay. I'll talk to this group. This was a wonderful talk and wonderful. The first thing I want to say is we will have Sunday early voting. So if you want to do souls to the polls, the supervisor of election has extended early voting through that last Sunday before election.
Yes.
So we are the League of Women Voters, and women got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. So the founding documents did not include women as voters, and the league was formed 1920 with the mission statement of educating and empowering voters, because we believe that an informed citizenry makes democracy stronger. So men are welcome to join the league as well. So that's the first thing I say. We make the most important thing we do right now is we have a voter guide, Vote 411. And it's a nationwide resource where you can put in your address and find everything that's going to be on your ballot, and all of the candidates, all of the amendments. And we've gone to a great, extensive research behind the issues. We interview the candidates, we publish their answers. We don't edit them. We don't advocate for any particular party. We hold ourselves nonpartisan because our main mission is to get people to vote. So we won't tell you who to vote for, but we'll give you the information that you need to make that decision. Our resources are extensive. We have the voter guide, we have the website, we give speeches to people who want to find out about everything from what's on the ballot to misinformation, disinformation, and how to combat that. And what's that? Oh, yes. This Sunday, I couldn't believe I read it. We're actually having a candidate forum at Santa Fe College at 12:30. The candidates for sheriff are going to be there. The state attorney is going to be there. The county commissioners, the state representative. Who else is? Oh, supervisor of elections going to be there on the stage, uncensored questions, and they have a chance for you to interview them. The league will interview them. It's the West Campus. It's on Lyceum. Yeah, there's flyers. Actually, in terms of what we provide, come stop by our table and see all the swag and things that we have. But we don't just exist for this year. We exist, hopefully we've existed now for over 100 years, and we continue to keep getting out the education that people need, and maybe making up for the deficit in civic education the students aren't getting in schools these days. No longer. That's right. We used to actually help people. Well, we do still help people register to vote. What we do is we go out to locations and we bring our laptop and we plug them into the website so that they actually are doing their own voter registration. But we will go wherever there are voters. Yeah. And we have this thing. Well, we have this. Don't we have a T-shirt? Voting is my superpower. I think your point was very the most important. What is it? The most powerful person in the country is a voter.
You mentioned something Monroe said. I heard about one of the other founding fathers. One of the Adams, I think it was John Adams, expressed deep doubt that democracy could even survive. He said something to the effect of a democracy will murder itself. So I want to get your reaction to 4 ideas. I think this country can survive if we first eliminate the loopholes in the 13th Amendment that makes prisoners slaves, eliminate the Electoral College, eliminate political parties, and eliminate private money from politics. I better add a 5th thing, 4 more Supreme Court justices. So do you think can America survive if we do those 5 things?
You'll find no argument here. Thank you. If there are no more questions, I'd like to thank you all again for allowing me to run my mouth. You are a great audience. Thank you very much.